Hey, this is Dr. John Hall.
Hey, Dr. Hall. It's a pleasure to have you.
Sorry, I'm a little late. Just got out of the office, so.
Yeah, it's fine. It's fine. You know, we know how it is syncing up here on these start times. Sometimes can be a little bit of a chore. So.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm glad to have you on here. The subject you bring to the table is fascinating, and it's something that, like you make mentions in your other appearances and lectures, that it's something I think really needs to be brought to the general public's knowledge. So I'm really happy and looking forward to this.
Yeah, and I believe Dr. Robert Duncan was actually supposed to be on with us today. I don't know if he's called in yet or not.
No, he's not on yet. You're the you made it first, so you get the prize so far.
Well, for the listeners that I don't know if they've heard much about this, but I'm an anesthesiologist and chronic pain doctor in San Antonio, Texas. Wrote a book called A New Breed, Satellite Terrorism in America, that basically deals with the problem that we're seeing actually nationally and globally of people being harassed with a very advanced technological form of surveillance that not only can download thoughts and experiences and hallucinations and voices into your head to harass you with, but can control the electronics in your house. A lot of this is usually combined with a form of stalking called gang stalking or organized stalking, where most of these victims are noticing that their homes are being broken into, things are being tampered with. The book is based on my ex-fiancée, who this happened to her. Started doing a little checking, seeing that there wasn't much at that time in the public domain about this. There were several websites that were addressing it, but nothing. You could go to Amazon or go to Barnes & Nobles and pick up a book about it. The book goes a little bit into the technology behind it and a lot into her story, mainly as an opener for other people to come out with their stories so we can get some exposure in the public that this, in fact, is going on.
Yeah, that's very interesting to me because just in my own personal journey, shall we say, it seemed to me that there was more going on in terms of the sort of subliminal programming in social and just in our society, and so hearing more data that along the lines of what you're bringing to the table kind of helps really paint a better picture of how pervasive all of this information is that's being bombarding us.
Well, and that's why I was hopefully Dr. Duncan will make it on. He wrote a book called Project Soul Catcher, Volume 2, and he worked with some government research agencies who did some projects that were similar and involved in this technology, and actually can go a little more into detail about how the human mind is actually uploadable and downloadable much like a computer, using these various frequencies and electromagnetic weapons. And actually in the book identifies a lot of the same things that people are experiencing to what hackers do with a computer. And as you know, there was an article written called The Mind Has No Firewall, and that certainly has proven to be true, that you can actually program the mind much like you program a computer.
Yeah, this is awesome because that's these concepts, like you're saying, a firewall for the mind is just a little bit about my background, so you have an idea of who you're talking to here. But by the way, my name is Jerry.
Okay.
But I've was born a natural lucid dreamer, and so I always had a awareness of other realms besides this waking one. And so there was things that I would see and experience that would kind of go from everywhere, my own personal emotional crap to like the very far out stuff that people talk about. And so I'd see a lot of things that have to do with how like the movie Inception, or just the whole concept of remote influencing and remote viewing for that matter. And so these concepts, I think it's good that they're now being grounded in fact with the technology, with our scientific understanding at this time, because I think it's important that people have recognized their own psyche and are able to kind of determine what is and what isn't. So I'm sure we'll get into this as well. That's important because as more and more people come forward with these stories and these complaints, that eventually the government's going to have to address that this is a problem of victimization and a criminal problem
rather than a psychiatric one, because up to this point, most of the people voicing these complaints have been shipped off to psychiatrists who have further victimized them. So that's why it's radio shows like yours and other radio shows are very important in exposing the truth.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe we can get into just jump into what would be some of the experiences someone might recognize if this was happening to them.
Well, I tell you what, most of the victims experience first is they usually notice the stalking. I know in my ex-fiance's case, we both noticed that she was being followed to and from work, had people hanging out around her condo, very obvious harassment. This isn't surveillance from a distance by someone with binoculars. These are people that are following you on your bumper in your car, walking right behind you, making comments to let you know that you're being watched. That's why it's actually more of a harassment tool. That's what most people notice first. Then usually the next thing they notice is that they're either sensing an electromagnetic presence around them or in their room, or getting tinnitus, or the medical term for ringing in the ears. Once the tinnitus sets in, then it's usually not long after that the ringing in the ears becomes voices in the head. And these aren't angels or demons or, the voices that typically would be associated with schizophrenia or mental illness, but these are a lot of times the multiple voices of 2 or 3 people who are describing your whereabouts, repeating back to you what you're doing or what you're thinking, talking about what your plans are or what you're doing. For instance, they'll say, well, she's in the bathroom looking in the mirror, and that's geared to let you know that you are indeed under surveillance. The stalking, we think, may be, for one, it's a psychological operation. It's meant to put you in a victim mind state, along with the breaking and entering, that no matter what you do, they're going to be able to get to you, get into your house, and do what they want. And the second thing, we think that the stalking may actually function as GPSing you long enough for them to get a reading on your brain waves. Most of this is being done without a chip, contrary to popular belief. Most people think you have to be chipped to be tracked. And with this technology, it's actually tracking you based on a brain fingerprint or individualities in your individual brain wave.
Yeah, and that's interesting you bring that up, because we've had Stuart Swerdlow on the show before, where he talked about the reversed engineered technology, where that was part of it, was tuning into specific brain patterns of individuals.
That seems to be how it is being done. Now, not saying we haven't found chips in people. We have. Matter of fact, Bob Boyce is an inventor in Georgia, most notable case here lately. Designed a patent to draw on free energy to recharge batteries. Was invited out to dinner to talk about the patent to a government official. He was drugged. Sometime later, working in his lab, which is a shielded lab, he does electronics work, and he noticed a foreign frequency emanating in this shielded area. And when he traced the frequency back, he traced it back to his shoulder where there was a lump. And he went to a surgeon, and they did surgery on him, removed the lump, and it turned out to be a melanoma. But more importantly, buried within this melanoma was a verichip.
That's so That's so messed up. So not only is there a chip there, it's like, oh, let's have a little cancer around it too. Why not?
Well, and you know, some of the mouse studies done with Verichip did show that these chips, when they're buried in animal flesh, you know, will cause carcinogenic changes. So it could be that the chip itself actually caused the melanoma, or vice versa. It could have been growing before he was chipped there. But and I believe since then he's had a second Verichip removed from his body too, that he can trace back to this government official that met with him regarding his patent. There's another case out of Missouri, James Walbert, who I've seen his MRIs, and we did find, you know, a foreign body that he went to a PI group, had a frequency scan. He was emanating a frequency out of his right trapezius muscle, the muscle that runs from the neck to the shoulder. And on MRI, on one slice of the MRI, you can see what looks like a capsular-shaped foreign body buried in his trapezius muscle. He's also an inventor. He also was a victim of drugging believe he said he, had went out and had a couple of beers and woke up 4 days later at his house with blood trickling down his shoulder, and indeed appears to be chipped. Now, he hasn't had it removed yet, so at this point, as a physician, you can only say there's a foreign body there. Now, once it's removed and examined, if it is a chip, it's a chip. It certainly has the appearance of a chip on MRI. So that is going on, but out of all the thousands of victims that I've corresponded with, worked with, and scanned, the chipping is the rarity. Most of the people, we can't find any evidence of chipping, yet they're still being victimized, not only with hearing voices in their head, hearing voices of their perpetrators in their surroundings, but being attacked with directed energy, which can cause headaches, heart palpitations, muscle spasms, muscle twitching, heartburn, just a variety of symptoms. Now, some of that can also be done with EEG entrainment, as we talked about, that you can actually bombard the brain with a foreign frequency that corresponds to the EEG tracing of someone with, let's say, flu-like symptoms. Well, if your brain is bombarded with that external frequency, it will slowly entrain that frequency, and then you will display the symptoms of the desired trait that they're trying to make you display.
Yes, yeah. This is good information. This is stuff that people need to hear. And so this, and I would imagine this could be some of the extremes of this harassment. But is there, how does it progress? What's the end? Where does it go? Once, they say they're harassing someone, they've heard the ringing, now they're hearing the voices, and then what? Then what happens?
Well, typically what happens once the ringing turns to voices, the victim usually realizes that they're under some type of surveillance. The unfortunate thing with this type of voice-to-skull or microwave auditory effect type hearing is that it's designed for only the target to hear. In 1996, the Army came out with their addendum to the biologic effects of non-lethal weapons, where they talk about the microwave auditory effect and how even with microphones in the ear canal or microphones attached to the scalp, that the voices can't be recorded. And they go on to say, imagine the incapacitating effect on an enemy combatant when they begin to hear voices in their own head. Another high-ranking military official said, we now have the ability to talk someone to death. So the bad thing is once these victims tell their family members, tell their employer, tell their physician that they're hearing voices, well, in today's psychiatric community, if you're hearing voices your psychiatrist can't hear, then you're delusional or schizophrenic until proven otherwise. And unfortunately, the psychiatric community has not been educated on the fact that there is technology out here now that is meant to mimic mental illness.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point, because in terms of the psychiatric community, or actually I find the academic / scientific community at large, is that compartmentalization mentality kind of keeps a lot of these different professionals from kind of cross-training, if you will, and knowing about the technology. Because, like the researcher Nick Begich, how he talks about similar technology and its applications, but he doesn't necessarily come from a purely conspiratorial point either. So it's showing that a lot of these lot of figures in these fields don't research. They don't even go beyond or try to expand their field, and so it's to the detriment of all these people they're working with.
Well, and that's part of the problem. And the other problem is a lot of this technology has been classified for a long time. Now, from the psychiatric community standpoint, at the very top of the psychiatric community, they know very well that this technology exists, because the early studies on mind control through MKUltra and MKSearch and Bluebird were all headed up by psychiatrists. Many of these psychiatrists were tops in their fields. Ewan Cameron up at McGill University was the president of the American Psychiatric Association and the Canadian Psychiatric Association. Jolly West out in California, same thing, one of the top people in his field. Now, does this knowledge trickle down to the community psychiatrist that you're going to be sent to in your hometown? Probably not. Matter of fact, some of the psychiatrists that I know that I've talked to don't even fully believe that MKUltra really happened. It's not taught in their schools. Certainly they're not going to teach them in residency that their profession was responsible for some of the most horrendous crimes ever known in this country.
Yeah.
So they're largely ignorant of the technology, and that's where it's really kind of our charge to educate the community psychiatrist anyway, that just because someone's hearing voices doesn't mean they're schizophrenic. They may actually be a victim of criminalization. So that's where we need to do a better job, probably educating them. Unfortunately, when you're another physician trying to tell a psychiatrist, fellow physician psychiatrist, that voices in somebody's head is technologic, and not mental illness, then you're subject to getting a diagnosis as well. So.
Yeah. And isn't that amazing how that works? Like that people are so just quick to judge, and especially in a community where we're supposed to be, not charged, not have a charged response, but just look at and observe and record facts. You know what I mean?
Well, and to top it off with, the psychiatric community has been trying to mainstream, mental illness for a long time. You've seen the commercials for all the various antidepressants where,
yes.
They're trying to say, hey, it's okay to have a mental problem. You can be on antidepressants or Seroquel, and it's okay. You're still going to function, and society's still going to love you. Unfortunately, that's not the truth. Once you're diagnosed as delusional or psychotic or schizophrenic, for voicing these complaints, really your life starts to spiral downhill after that, because your employer usually doesn't want to keep you hired on. If you seem to be mentally dysfunctional or have been diagnosed as mentally dysfunctional, your family members will treat you differently, pretty much ostracized after that. And then that just adds to the problem that in your heart of hearts, you're a victim, but no one else believes you. And then that tends to lead to behavior that even makes you look even more crazy as you try to convince everybody around you that it really is happening. So it's kind of a vicious cycle, and once you reach that point, it's pretty hard to get back.
Have there been any cases where someone who's been under this harassment has been able to prove that this is going on?
Not as of yet. I mean, we've had victims that have taken trifield meters and gaussimeter meter readings where they can prove that there's an external frequency being bombarded into their homes or their surroundings. Mm-hmm. That's usually written off, by people as well. That could be coming from a radio tower or coming from, a cell tower. So far, that's the problem. We've had a hard time actually proving that this is attack, and that is the ultimate legal problem. I mean, when you're being attacked remotely, possibly it might be somebody across town, it might be somebody in another state that's actually doing the attacking, and with a weapon you can't see and can't prove, and voices that you can't record.
Yeah, and delivered via a method that's fairly untraceable, which could very well be coming from a radio tower. So.
Yeah, well, one of the reasons we think it's probably multimodal. It's probably coming from a combination of ground sources, satellite, and HARP. We've taken victims out onto desolate ranches here in Texas where we know there's no cell coverage, there's no power lines, there's very little electromagnetic pollution, and they still hear voices and they still get attacked. We've had people go from this country to another country and get attacked while they're on the plane. Taking people on boats into the middle of the Gulf of Mexico, they still get attacked. That part of it leads me to believe that a lot of it is satellite-based because it can track you anywhere. And many victims will tell you, well, I left California to the Midwest thinking I would get away from it. And they get away from the stalking for a little while until, they're handed over to another perpetrator group, but they don't get away from the attacks.
So who's targeted generally? Is there any correlation between who's being targeted and who isn't?
Well, we've done surveys of the victims through a group called Freedom from Covert Surveillance and Harassment. That's a human rights organization that specifically deals with this phenomenon. It's over 1,000 members now, and it's just one of many organizations that deal with what we call TIs, or targeted individuals. The surveys through them have shown that 70% of the victims are female. A large percentage of those victims are reporting sexual assault along with the break-ins and the electronic harassment. Most of the victims are between 35 and 55. Most are fairly educated. the group of TIs that we've surveyed are mostly professionals and mostly have a bachelor degree or higher education. It doesn't seem to be concentrated on one religious group or one racial group. There's blacks, Hispanics, and whites fairly equally attacked. And now there is one case in Palm Springs, California, that does seem to be more hate crime based. There's a group of mostly homosexual men in the Palm Springs area, approximately 60, that are all being attacked and hearing voices. And amazingly enough, they're all hearing the same voice. They're hearing the voice of a female voice that goes by Lisa in their heads. Now, when you have 60 people hearing voices, you can make an argument initially that it's group delusional disorder. But when they're all hearing the same voice, I think the statistics go out the window on that, and you have to acknowledge that it's some form of harassment. Yeah,
definitely. And now that makes sense in terms of like the Palm Spring incident, because especially like the approximation to so many military installations and all these other things, and then that community kind of being this hodgepodge of serious conservatism and sort of new thought, shall we say. And so that is interesting. So is it with this survey though, is there do like what the people actually do factor in, does it seem to kind of coincide with any political ideologies that might be hot button? I mean, like I was saying, we have a gay community being targeted. Does it correlate with things like that too?
No. From what we've seen, no. The majority, like I said, the majority of the victims are female, and the majority of the female victims are housewives. When you talk to these victims, most of them have no radical political agenda, no radical political belief. Many of them are, for the most part, apolitical. Now, they certainly get political, once they realize what's going on and that they're being experimented on, and that's what this is really starting to look like, just worldwide experimentation. The technology is meant to control you. With the random sample of people that it seems to be targeting, and the fact that it's happening globally, and all of these people have virtually identical complaints, the technology is coming from the government. We have identified some of the perpetrator groups. They're not direct employees of the government. And I know in San Antonio it's a private investigative group that is accessing this technology. Now, the owner is former FBI. His son's a co-owner, and he's a former lieutenant colonel with the DOD. Certainly they have government ties in their past, but most of the perpetrator groups seem to be private individuals that are being allowed to access a governmental form of technology, which means that it's probably experimentation. If you remember from MKUltra, most of the early mind control experiments were farmed out to universities under the guise of legitimate research, or they were funded by front companies created by the CIA, such as the Human Ecology Fund and several others. That gives the government plausible deniability if any of these groups ever get brought to justice.
Yeah, that's true. And also then how we're hearing commonly too, how when you have front companies, and that makes any research or any findings that are proprietary and therefore not subject to FOIA requests as well.
Exactly. And that's one of the things that we're trying to get a congressional hearing on. I'm actually going to be speaking at the Bioethics Committee in Washington, D.C. in March about human experimentation. That's one of the pitfalls in this country, is it's, for the most part, not illegal for the government to experiment on the public.
Yeah.
That's governed by a set of rules called a common rule, and just about every case scenario has a distractor in the common rule where informed consent can be waived for one reason or another by the head of whatever department is doing the research. And then in the case of CIA and NSA research, that's all black budgeted. So basically the Congress people are signing off on a blank check. They really don't know what research the money is funding. And if they don't know the research is going on, then there's certainly not going to be an institutional review board or an IRB, which traditionally is what governs the safety of human subjects.
Yeah.
And that's what we need is a straight out law that says it's illegal to experiment on the public without informed consent in every case.
Mm-hmm.
And that doesn't exist.
Yeah, of course not. That would put too many operations and projects at risk now, wouldn't it? But we actually do have Dr. Duncan's contact information here. If we want to just give him, do you think it'd be wise just to give him a call, see if we can get him on the line here?
Sure, I'd love to have him on.
Let's see if we can get a hold, because sometimes we're not sure who's supposed to call who, and so it kind of happens that way. So we'll see what happens here, and because I'd love to get some of his input on some of the technology in particular. Whoa, hey, okay, like that. Okay, looks like we'll hear from him in time. So, but yeah.
Well, and again, Dr. Robert Duncan is a PhD. He has worked on some of these projects, and just so people know, excellent book, very technical book. It's not real easy reading, but he goes into detail how a lot of this is done. And it's called Project Soul Catcher Volume 2. It is available on Amazon by Dr. Robert Duncan. It's for anybody that's being victimized by this technology, it's a must-read.
Yeah, and I posted that information in the chat room too, and so anyone there wants to look that book up, as well as Dr. Hall's website, which is satweapons.com, which
that's the website.
Also posting in the chat room. There's a lot of information on there that everyone can check out and go a little more into. So, but yeah, there was a question concerned in the chat room earlier that had to do with maybe the implementation of nanotechnology too, in relation to some of the implants or such. Do you think that could possibly be being employed as well?
Yeah, that's one of the things we're looking into. Who has actually done a lot of work from the nanotechnology end of it is Dr. Staninger out of California. She's worked with several victims out there doing toxicologic exams, looking for exposure to heavy metals that possibly might be used in nanotech type chips. Mm-hmm. I know her take on that. A lot of this is being done through nanotechnology. The unfortunate thing with nanotechnology, if it is being done with nanotechnology, which I'm not sure that's real commonplace yet, since this has been going on for a couple of decades now, and most of the victims that I talked to started experiencing this in the late 80s, early 90s, which I think precludes a lot of these techniques to the criminal.
Okay, breaking up there. I can't tell if that's my connection or if that is on that side. So if those in the chat room, if you guys can... we lost Dr. Hall here. But we know that's kind of common in this game here on Blog Talk Radio, isn't it, though? Especially when we start getting good information. Gotta love those coincidences. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. I'm sure we'll be hearing back from Dr. John Hall very, very shortly here. But this is definitely an intriguing subject that I'm glad is being brought up right now, because that there is other factors going on in terms of this, consciousness wave, and so things like these this technology being aimed at average people, I can only imagine as being speculating basically that has to do with kind of keeping everything vibrating down, so to speak. It's part of that consciousness war, because to me I hear targeting apolitical people means that they're probably more susceptible to suggestion in different ways, because there's no filters formulated one way or another, or opinions or charge formulated one way or another. So, if this person could, literally just kind of go one way or another in terms of their subconscious reactions and triggers to outside stimulus. So this is why it's very important to pay attention to, we can say political ideology, but, it's really your own your own awareness of social issues is really kind of what you could almost say politics is, Um, and so, and it looks like we have Dr. Hall back here, so welcome back, Dr.
Hey,
Hall.
Jerry, and that will be one of the other problems you'll see whenever you're doing an interview with any of us that are fighting this battle is you'll notice that we get cut off a lot, or there'll be a lot of interference. And that's I used to do a radio show myself called The Control Factor. I was on RBN and on several AM broadcasters out of Texas, and we had a lot of technical problems every time we did the show. A lot of that was from electromagnetic harassment. As a matter of fact, we were on one AM station in San Antonio in the middle of one of our shows. They had apparently EMP'd the whole station, burned out their antennas, burned out their computers. The whole station went down for several days in repair. So,
Jeez.
I mean, that's unfortunately one of the things you're going to fight whenever you're talking to Duncan or myself, but probably Begich or anybody else that's trying to educate the public with this technology.
Oh yeah. Actually, it's very commonplace on here. I think all of our listeners we're not satisfied unless there's one cut off during the show. It's like we know we can't be talking about anything too new and serious if we haven't got cut off at least once.
Yeah.
So yeah, and it's and it's what I'm trying to do though is just trying to make that not a good play, because then I kind of just take it someplace that's speculative but probably fairly accurate, and so so it's probably just best to let everyone just talk, So,
yeah.
But yeah, it's but as we were talking about with the nano implementation, I can imagine, because it doesn't seem like these kind of fields they stay adherent to one form of technology. Like I've totally agree and can see exactly about in terms of being a kind of cross-platform endeavor to do some things. Absolutely. So I can imagine that it's all evolving too.
You there?
So we're I guess one of the questions is that is there other reports of this happening in other countries as well?
Oh yeah, I have corresponded with people that are having the exact same victimization. A lot of them in the UK, which you would imagine, because most of our intelligence is shared between the U.S. and the U.K. I've heard from victims from Norway, from Sweden, from China, from Italy, from Germany, from India, from Yemen, just about everywhere. This is a global thing, which is the other reason we think that eventually this is going to be, that we're in the experimental phase of technology that the eventual intent will be to control the world population with. I don't know how much you believe about global warming. My personal belief is that it's been fairly well debunked when they caught the scientists trying to lie about their results on temperature changes. That was probably going to be the initial global boogeyman. The general public always needs a boogeyman to be scared of to wrap them into control. We had 9/11. Therefore, we had the Patriot Act. We needed to surrender our civil liberties for our safety. Well, for the UN to have a global government, they'll need a global boogeyman. And the global warming thing kind of got debunked. If you've noticed, there's more and more coming out in the news now about aliens, alien contact. The UN has appointed a delegate for when there's alien contact. Even Fox News, one of the most conservative news channels, is doing stories about alien contact on occasion now that 5-10 years ago you've never seen on Fox News. That's all part of conditioning to eventually that the Project Bluebeam, alien contact will be what gives us the feeling that we need a global government to combat the alien invasion, and I can foresee that happening here relatively quickly in the future.
I wouldn't doubt that's something that's contemplated and maybe tried, and we've actually discussed this on the air actually with quite a few of our different guests, and it's And the thing, and everyone has the same census. So yeah, we we wouldn't put it past anyone to try it, and then how everyone kind of theorizes that we would never really see the race that kind of did anything, and they would be like, but this other good race has now vanquished that race, and they're here to help us, and now take your chip.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing too is one of the other things I've heard as well, that there's this other species of aliens that are already here, and guess what? They look just like us. They're human. Well, to me that's another government subterfuge. They're gonna here's a bunch of CIA agents that are gonna tell us they're aliens, but they look just like us. That's I'm not sure I'm buying that. Do I believe that there's probably life out there somewhere? Well, it would be illogical to think not. I mean, the galaxy, the universe is a big place. There's got to be other planets that support life. Have they came here and set up shop? That I'm not too sure about. I know there's been a lot of contact. There's been a lot of people who say they have. But from a more scientific standpoint, I know Dr. Persinger up at Laurentian in Canada, who used to do the microwave research under naval funding. I know he can actually bombard the temporal lobes of the brain with the right frequency of microwave energy and simulate alien abduction in the lab. So in my mind, that tells me that a lot of what we're seeing with alien contact quite possibly may be government experimentation with microwave energy.
Yeah, I would.
Because with this technology, they can make you see and believe anything. We're dealing with a form of technology where you can no longer trust your senses. You can't trust what your eyes see. You can't trust what your ears hear. And more than that, you can't trust what you really believe to be true or false.
It's interesting, because I guess one of the founders of Universal Truth Evolution, Aaron McCollum, he's a whistleblower, and he talked a lot about being involved in my labs and military abductions where they would fake that the stuff. So he talks a lot about that too, in terms of implanting memories or erasing memories as well. So yeah, I know that's definitely a factor for sure. And he talks about a lot of other stuff around concerning extraterrestrials as well. But yeah, that definitely is a factor, and it seems like you do have a certain almost like group. There's characteristics you can see that have these kind of contacts where you can kind of be like, this sounds interesting. Interestingly, like it could be something set up or implanted.
Well, and then on top of that, I don't know if you've ever heard of the False Memory Foundation. There's actually a foundation that's made up of mostly researchers and psychiatrists. It's called the False Memory Foundation, and they specifically disagree with the fact that any technology that people are complaining about that gives them false memories of experimentation, they're saying that that's all memories being intentionally implanted by psychotherapists and not from experimentation. Mm-hmm. So, and Michael Persinger, who's done a lot of this research with microwave energy, is a member of the False Memory Foundation.
Interesting.
So, yeah.
Interesting. And so like how this kind of digressing slightly a little bit here, in terms of this sort of insidious agenda going on, concerning essentially, you could say chipping everyone and all this, and how I think I've heard you bring it up too, concerning the biometric passports and such being one of those sort of intermediate steps. Is that something you still kind of see?
Eventually, you're going to reach a point where if they can't get a chip in your body, they're going to have a chip on you somewhere, whether it's in your cell phone, in your passport. I was at a conference all day yesterday regarding cyber terrorism with mostly military and intelligence people at the conference. One of the big new things coming down the pike now is a program called Connect the Dots. Pretty childish-sounding title for a program, but it is called Connect the Dots. And what this program is going to be designed to do, and it's a little on the low-tech side compared to what we're talking about, but will be equally as invasive to our privacy. They're going to have high-resolution cameras, kind of like they do in the UK already, that are essentially on every street corner, in front of every shop, every street light, that has facial recognition, body recognition, and behavioral recognition software attached to it. when you walk by one of these cameras, it will automatically run you through this system of recognition software and compare it to data that's been compiled in the NSA data banks through your social networking sites. So if you have a picture of yourself on your Facebook or your MySpace, it will instantaneously scan a vast amount of databases and match your facial recognition, body recognition, and behavioral recognition up to already known pictures of you that you've supplied on social networking sites to give an ID. The justification for this is that it will be able to identify known terrorists the minute they walk into a building. But the downside of it is that being that Facebook is a data mining company, essentially, was started up by In-Q-Tel Money, which is a venture capital firm for the CIA. That's where Mark Zuckerberg got the money to start it. It's been a data mining company from the beginning. Most people put pictures of themselves and their family on there. That'll be part of the database that this Connect the Dots systems accesses.
Yeah, pretty much. And it's interesting because I remember way back when Mark Zuckerberg had said that he believes that privacy is a fallacy, and to a degree I actually I agree with him, because there really isn't much that one could really hide in this universe, especially looking at even government programs concerning remote viewing and such. There's information you just can't hide it. It's just not going to be hidden. But at the same time, it's the whole violation aspect, and kind of like it's just totally overblown. I mean, it's just completely how do we say? I don't know. I'd almost say it's a misappropriation of resources. You know what I mean? It's like we could be using all of that time and effort to do much more cooler things, I think.
Yeah, and it's one of the other things too is that I'm not so concerned about my security that I'm willing to give up all my privacy. Because
exactly.
once you give up your privacy, we have a government that historically is known to experiment on its population without their knowledge. Some horrendous experiments. I mean, the Nazi Germans didn't have anything over on us. I mean, we were doing a lot of the same experimentation here.
With the same scientists. Yeah.
With the same scientists that were brought over with Operation Paperclip. So, as a matter of fact, here in San Antonio, we had at Randolph Air Base, one of our libraries was named after a Nazi scientist that was brought over with Operation Paperclip.
Well,
So we have a government that I really don't trust having all of my personal information, and certainly don't trust watching me everywhere I go.
Yeah,
because eventually it'll be used to your detriment.
Oh, well, it's actually, we had Dr. Duncan here with us on the line for a second, then he dropped. So I think he's trying to get in now. So,
great.
But yeah, so we might eventually hear from him soon. But yeah, that's true, and that's that leads into the next question I had was, so how you're saying it's with some of this harassment, or from what you've experienced so far, is that it's not necessarily government, but almost like government contractors. Now, what would they be? Are they just like arbitrarily contracting these people to conduct research, or is there some kind of agenda in terms of like why they target people, what the hypothesis is of like this will happen if we control people to do this? Do you know any of that at all?
Well, I think from what the surveys show and from the perpetrators we've seen, I think basically the perpetrators are themselves part of the experiment as well. And I think they're basically handed over this technology and told carte blanche that they can victimize whoever they want to victimize for whatever reason. That also helps ensure a random sample of population for the people who are actually crunching the data. Yeah.
That's true. That makes sense. And then that would make sense why you'd kind of find megalomaniacal delinquents to try to do it. Makes sense to me, because I'm sure they do the job fairly well for what they're contracted to.
Well, and the bad thing is there's not much way to get away from this, and since it does target the EEG, there are some neurofeedback type mechanisms you can use. If you can alter your own EEG, it makes it harder to target you by focusing on other things. It's hard to explain in our short term, but it is defeatable technology, and it is a two-way data stream. So for people that are hearing voices and being attacked by this, you can actually feed your thoughts back to them and create havoc with them too, which is one of the dangers with this technology, is that they're afraid eventually people will be able to see through the eyes of the perpetrator and see how it's being done.
Yeah, exactly. So keep that in mind, everyone, literally. So if you feel this happening, guess what? Go look at them. Tell them what you think. Tell them what they can do with themselves, and tell them they should have been a little nicer to their mom or whatever while you're picking all that information up too.
Well, and I tell you what, for the people who may be listening that are non-believers, look up University of Irvine, California, synthetic telepathy. This was classified for a long time. They're doing research to where warfighters in the field, the soldiers, will be able to communicate thought to thought to each other in the field, and they actually have a website up for the experimentation from University of Irvine. So, I mean, this isn't really it's one of the worst problems in the nation that everybody knows about and nobody wants to admit is happening. So, but they do have a website up. They go into some detail about what they're working on. And if they're working on how to get this technology to where one soldier can communicate with another soldier via thought, then that tells us that they already have it pretty well down pat, where they can do it at least one direction from a computer interface directly to an individual, which is what we're seeing in the public. Yeah,
and actually another program that's at UCI too that they were doing concerning telepathy was for being able to tell like injured people, like soldiers and such, who can't talk, and have had traumatic injuries. So there was another study going on at UCI concerning telepathy, and with a military application once again.
And that's been relatively perfected now to actually monitor the electrical impulses going to the vocal muscles to control a mechanical speech box or a mechanical arm, or a machine, has been pretty well elucidated and is actually in the application stage now, using your thoughts to control something. I mean, there's two toys out now, MindFlex and the Force, where you can control a ball with your mind. And as a matter of fact, there's an application for the iPhone now where you can control the screen with your mind by wearing a headset that has a little electrode that fits on your forehead and a clip on your earlobe to monitor brainwaves.
Yeah, if you're worried about the government kind of knowing your thoughts, I'd really be wary of Apple knowing them.
Wow.
Oh wow, but yeah, no, that's true. And actually, I would love to experiment with some of those toys, just the non-iPhone one, just to see what's up with them. Because it sounds like they sound really intriguing, and I think it's really interesting because how you're saying about altering your own brain emissions, if you will, to kind of make it harder for a lock. I mean, like a toy like that applied and saying, well, now I know what a different mind frame is in order to accomplish something. You can kind of apply that knowledge to I don't want these guys looking at me. So, but, at least theoretically. So, but yeah, this is all very intriguing information. How long has this been going on from what you've been able to gather?
Well, at least a decade, probably longer. Most victims that I've corresponded with have been experiencing this for a decade. I know it really started where I noticed it in San Antonio in the late 90s. I've spoken to victims that have been targeted since the mid to late 80s. As you know, MK Ultra, when they first started trying to control the mind, those experiments started in the late 50s all through the 60s, culminating at least with the Rockefeller Commission and the Church Committee hearings, where there was some freedom of information exposure about the experimentation. Really, the only thing that ended in these programs was the freedom of information. The programs themselves continued, and what we're having today is more than likely a continuation of MK Ultra.
One of the questions posed, and it's an interesting one to think about, because if we have these sort of carte blanche sort of havoc-wreaking studies, is there applications that sort of track for beneficial purposes too that you've come across yet?
Well, I mean, certainly from a medical standpoint, there's a lot of beneficial things that could come out of this technology. I mean, for people with, addiction problems, you could actually, with their consent. Now, any of the things that I say are positive attributes of this technology are, of course, with informed consent of the person that it's being used on. You could certainly repattern someone to help lessen addictive behavior. In cases of brain damage, and one of the cases that I've illustrated before on interviews is Terry Schiavo. We went round and round for months trying to determine, should you pull the cord or should you not pull her breathing tube? Is she having conscious thought or is she not? With this technology, it reads your thoughts. I mean, you can tell if somebody has enough brain tissue left to have conscious thought immediately. All they would have to do is scan her for several minutes, and you would be to be able to tell if she actually had, a functioning brain. Unfortunately, it was left up to neurologists who are still looking at EEG tracings circa 1950 to make that determination, when this technology can do it immediately and with no question. There's just, a vast array of things that could be done. I mean, neuromuscular diseases, if you can override the nervous system to make nerves fire or make muscles, function, there's a lot that could be done with muscular dystrophy probably and other neuromuscular diseases, myasthenia gravis, various things like that. And but it's not being released for that purpose.
Yeah, because that would mean like too much goodness would happen, and there would be less suffering, and we can't have that now, can we?
No, we can't. And that's with any technology. As soon as something that seems pretty interesting comes along, I mean, the government runs in and black budgets it and keeps the scientists that have actually developed it, kind of to themselves. And eventually this will be common knowledge that can happen. But, the bad thing about someone being able to hear your thoughts in real time, which is the way this technology works, is the social ramifications it's going to have will be far greater than probably the good that it can do. Once people realize that the government not only can watch you inside your house, can attack you for behavior they don't agree with, and hear your thoughts, well, there's a lot of, psychosocial implications of that, especially, among the religious. When you pray or, it's not God hearing your prayers, it's the government, and that's going to be disconcerting to a lot of people.
That's very true, and I think, and I also think, because that really does play psychologically on one's mind of like, and it's interesting it's kind of interesting you bring up the religious aspect, because that's where most people feel they have this guilt, or they have that guilt put on them, and so all of a sudden if they know someone else is reading their thoughts, they're like, oh crap, and they're like embarrassed, or they feel guilty about something and all this other stuff. So that gets in this whole other slew of just personal issues for each individual, and I can see what you're saying. It could wreak havoc, the implications in terms of like what, if it came out just bam that this was going on, then more than likely government, at least contracted people, are sitting there arbitrarily looking at people's minds and thoughts and all this other stuff. I think there'd be a little bit of an uproar on that one. So.
Yeah, and the other thing, too, is that what we're seeing a lot in these victims is they're actually being attacked based on what they're thinking. And I don't know if you've ever consciously tried to control your thought processes, but, when your mind is on one particular endeavor and you're thinking about that endeavor, and then someone starts, burning your skin or burning your eyes or giving you a severe headache and telling you don't think that thought, well, the more you're told not to think it, the more you tend to think it. And that is one of the most horrendous things that we see, is people being attacked for their thoughts. And it's very hard to control your thought processes. So this is it's the most demonic technology that's ever come down the pike. However, it could be some of the best technology that we've ever had medically. But I just don't see that being released in the near future. I think one of the reasons that this experimentation is being done like it's being done through third parties that can be denied. I mean, I tell victims to concentrate on the stalking. almost all of these victims are having their homes broken into and they're being stalked. Identify the stalkers. Try to get the stalkers in trouble for stalking. Don't mention, the unprovable technology. And that might bring an end to it, because once we get some of these stalkers arrested or renditioned, or worse comes to worse, where we have to pick them up ourselves to interrogate them, we'll get to the bottom of where the centers are that it's actually being done in each state. We're hoping that the government will intervene and do that, to where victims themselves, don't have to actually, become combat units to do this. But and it's slowly getting there. We're getting more and more people educated. More and more people are contacting me off of my website now. As a matter of fact, I heard from another physician in the state of Texas who's recently started getting attacked. And, these people, these victims, people that are crazy and hearing voices usually don't start looking around to see why they're hearing voices. They don't think there's anything wrong with it. And victims, they recognize that these are people that are watching me. They're describing where I'm at. They're describing what I'm doing. My home's getting broken into. My things are being vandalized. And I'm being attacked with something that is very obviously external. It's the farthest thing from mental illness that there could be. And these victims know that very well, but can't convince their doctors, their psychiatrists, their family members, or their employers that that's the case until they get victimized. And then they're in the same group. And case in point is, just today I got an email from another physician who said, a year ago I wouldn't have believed any of this, but it's happening to me.
Yeah. And unfortunately, unfortunately, some of these things have to happen to people before they really start believing them. Despite data, despite numerous credible accounts and such, and I kind of think it's a tribute to a lot of the programming that's involved in society right now that tries to negate that unseen world and tries to tell us that everything's just like a machine, And